Welcome my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know where are you watching from and what time is it there. Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. I had never been the type of person to shop at dollar stores. It wasn't because I thought I was above it, I just never lived near one growing up. My parents were brand loyal, coupon-cutting people who stuck to stores like Kroger or Target, and that habit stayed with me as I got older. By my mid-20s, I was living alone in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina. Dollar stores still weren't part of my routine, but I was broke. I had recently quit a corporate call center job that was draining the life out of me to start working nights at a shipping warehouse. While the pay was better, the shift change had thrown my body into complete chaos. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks, and most days, my brain felt like mush. With rent due and every dollar counting, I found myself pulling into a place called Dollar Zone one Tuesday night. It was late March, and the night air still held a chill. I remember how quiet the area felt as I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. Overhead, the street lamps buzzed with a dull, low hum. There was a gas station nearby that looked mostly abandoned, and behind it sat one of those cheap motels where the curtains are always drawn and a steady stream of strangers comes and goes at all hours. I needed the basics: trash bags, paper towels, and a new phone charger, since mine had sparked and died the night before. I figured I would give Dollar Zone a try to see how much I could save, plus, I was a little curious. The store was small and old, bathed in harsh fluorescent light. The woman behind the counter didn't even look up when I walked in. As far as I could tell, there were no other customers, just the two of us. I grabbed a small red basket and began walking through the aisles. Most of the products weren't name brands. Many had strange foreign labels or knockoff logos that looked almost, but not quite, familiar, the kind of things that make you squint and laugh, like Dawn dish soap or Swiffer's pads. Still, I was mentally adding up the savings and telling myself it was worth the trip. I was in the second aisle, looking at cleaning supplies, when I first felt her presence. I hadn't heard anyone walk up. I didn't even look at her at first, but the air felt heavy, like that unmistakable sensation you get when someone is staring at you. It was the absolute stillness that caught my attention, as if the energy in the room had suddenly shifted. I kept my eyes on the shelf, pretending to compare sponges, but I could feel her just standing there, motionless. After a few seconds of the hair standing up on my neck, I moved on to the next aisle. I turned into the next aisle, kitchen items, I think, and that's when I finally looked over my shoulder. She was there again. She was a short woman, maybe in her mid-40s, with thick, dark hair that had a lot of volume, as if it had been teased or curled. Her clothes were mismatched. A floral top, jeans that were too big at the waist, and cheap white sneakers. Her eyes were deep-set, and something about the way she looked at me made my stomach tighten. I gave her a quick, polite half-smile, the kind women use when we're trying not to offend someone who gives off a weird vibe, and I turned away. She didn't smile back. I moved to another aisle, and she followed. This went on for at least 5 minutes. Every time I changed aisles, she ended up near me. She was never directly behind me and never too close, but she was always within my line of sight. At first, I tried to convince myself she was just shopping for the same things, but it began to feel timed and purposeful. I started avoiding eye contact and pretended to be busy on my phone, gripping the plastic handle of my basket tighter every time I turned a corner only to see her a few feet away, still watching. Then, something happened that made my blood run cold. As I turned into the frozen food section near the back of the store, I heard her mumble something. It was soft, but just loud enough for me to catch the words, "You smell like my daughter." I froze in place, unsure if I had heard her correctly. I turned halfway, pretending to look at the glass freezer door, and saw her again. She wasn't looking at the food, she was looking directly at me. That's when I noticed something unsettling about her eyes. They were wide, far too wide. As if she hadn't blinked in a long time. Her pupils were huge and unnatural, making me wonder if she was on something. My heart began to race. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked away, abandoning the freezer aisle and heading straight toward the front of the store. I went to the checkout counter, dumped my basket, and tried to act normal. The cashier was a young guy, maybe 18 or 19 years old. He gave me a nod, rang up my items quickly, and bagged them without saying a word. The woman didn't follow me to the front. I paid, muttered a quick thanks, and hurried out. The parking lot was even quieter than before. A light wind had picked up, and I walked quickly to my car. I unlocked it, tossed my things into the back seat, got in, and slammed the door, locking it immediately. Then I saw it. A dusty silver sedan was parked near the edge of the lot, about 50 feet away. I hadn't noticed it when I arrived. Maybe it had just pulled in, or maybe it had been sitting there in the dark the whole time. Either way, the moment I turned the key in the ignition, the sedan's headlights flicked on. I froze. The car started moving, slowly at first, then gaining speed. I kept my car in reverse, waiting for it to pass so I could back out, but it didn't pass. Instead, it veered toward me and slammed into my car. It wasn't a high-speed collision, but it was enough to jolt the frame and throw my body against the seat. I screamed. The silver sedan backed up a few feet, and that's when I saw her behind the wheel. It was the woman from the store. She was laughing, a strange, dry laugh with her mouth wide open and those huge, unblinking eyes fixed on me. Then, without warning, she floored it, peeling out of the parking lot and disappearing down the street. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone as I dialed 911. The police arrived 20 minutes later, and I told them everything. I gave them everything, the make and model of the car, the description of the woman, and the details of how she had followed me through the aisles. They took my statement, but they didn't seem optimistic about finding her. Later, I received a phone call with an update that chilled me to my core. The car wasn't even hers. It was registered to a man living at that rundown motel behind the gas station. Apparently, the woman had taken it, but he hadn't reported it stolen because, as the officer put it, they were close. The full story that emerged was even worse. Her name was Rosalind Baines. She was a former schoolteacher who had spiraled into drug addiction after a bitter divorce and had been living at that motel for months. The man who owned the car was either her boyfriend or her pimp, depending on who you asked. Off the record, the officer told me that Rosalind had a history of erratic, dangerous behavior. In a previous incident, she had followed a young girl through a CVS, trying to convince her that she was her missing daughter. The girl was a complete stranger. The police found Rosalind 3 days later, wandering barefoot near the interstate and mumbling to herself. She was placed under a psychiatric hold, but they didn't charge her for the hit and run because the car's owner refused to press charges. He simply didn't want to be involved. I never saw her again. But for months afterward, I lay awake wondering what would have happened if I hadn't left the store when I did. What if I had confronted her? What if I had made eye contact? What did she really want? Did she actually believe I was her daughter, or was she someone else entirely? Was she planning to hurt me, or was I just the unlucky target of a delusional mind? I'll never know for sure, but I never stepped foot in a dollar zone again. The scariest part of a horror story isn't the monster under the bed, it's the person standing right behind you in the grocery aisle. Rosalind Baines wasn't just a stranger, she was a woman living in a dangerous delusion, and for one night, I was her only target. We like to think we're safe in public, but you never know who is watching you, learning your face, and waiting for you in the parking lot. If this story gave you chills, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Sleep with your windows locked tonight, because you never know who might be wandering your neighborhood. See you in the next one. I never did get an answer. But I've never stepped foot in a Dollar Zone or any other dollar store again, and I never will. I certainly never expected anything interesting to happen while working at a dollar store. In fact, that was part of the appeal. Back in 2014, I was in a rough place financially. I had dropped out of community college halfway through my second semester because I couldn't afford both tuition and rent. I had just moved into a cheap, run-down apartment in a town called Redfield in upstate New York. It was one of those places where the air always smelled like old wood and diesel fuel, and where everyone either knew each other's business or didn't care enough to ask. I landed a part-time job at the local Dollar Tree just a couple of blocks away. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a job. It meant minimum wage, long hours on my feet, and dealing with customers who treated me like furniture. I didn't complain, I just needed to hold on until I could save enough for something better. Most of the time, I worked the closing shift alone. It wasn't as bad as it sounds. We were open until 10 p.m., and the store was small, just 10 aisles total, a small back room for storage, and a sad little break room with a microwave that made everything taste like cardboard. The evenings were usually dead after 8:30 p.m. It gave me time to restock the shelves, clean up, and wait out the final hour at the front counter. I was perfectly fine with the quiet. But there was one night. A night I still think about years later, when that quiet became absolutely terrifying. It was a Thursday. I remember because it had been overcast all day, and the weather was weirdly warm for October, the kind of muggy, sticky heat that feels unnatural, like the air itself didn't want to be touched. I was scheduled to work from 3 p.m. until closing. It had been a completely normal shift. The usual crowd came in after school. Kids buying candy, teenagers trying to act cool, and older ladies stocking up on off-brand paper towels. By 9:30 p.m., I hadn't seen a customer in almost 20 minutes. I was sitting behind the counter, playing a game on my phone. I always kept the volume low just in case someone walked in. I was deep into one of those time-killer games, a match 3 puzzle or something similar, and I was zoning out hard, barely even blinking. Then, I heard a noise. A clatter. It came from somewhere in the middle of the store, loud enough to snap me out of my game. I paused and sat up straighter, listening intently. It sounded like something had fallen, a single object, maybe a plastic bin or a stack of paper plates. I looked toward the aisles, but because of the store's layout, I couldn't see past the first few sections from my spot at the register. I hesitated. I wasn't scared yet, just curious and maybe slightly annoyed. Things fell off the shelves sometimes. It was just part of the job. The shelves were cheap, and the stockers didn't always line things up correctly, so items falling wasn't unusual. Still, I stayed put. I was comfortable where I was and figured I would just clean it up during my final closing checks. About 3 minutes later, there was another sound. Thump. It was louder this time. I jumped slightly in my chair and stared toward the back of the store. This sound seemed heavier. I squinted, trying to see if someone had slipped in unnoticed, but the bell above the front door was loud, and I hadn't heard it. A tight knot formed in my chest. There was no one in the store, I was sure of it. I had seen the last customer leave 10 minutes ago, and the front door hadn't opened since. I would have heard the bell, I would have felt the draft. That's when the atmosphere shifted. The silence suddenly felt too heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I set my phone down and stood up, my sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum. I slowly moved from behind the counter and headed toward the aisles. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and thin under the harsh fluorescent lights. There was no reply. No footsteps. Nothing. I walked slowly toward the source of the noise, aisle 6 or 7, where the plastic goods and canned food were kept. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I didn't know why I was so nervous. Maybe it was just the oppressive stillness or that prickling sensation of being watched. When I turned into aisle 7, I saw them. 2 items were lying on the floor, a few aluminum foil trays and a package of holiday napkins. They weren't heavy, but they also weren't the kind of things that just fall on their own unless someone, or something, touches them. I stared at them for a long moment. Finally, I bent down, picked them up, and looked around. The shelves were full and orderly. Nothing else seemed out of place. I put the items back, straightened a crooked row of plastic forks, and stood perfectly still. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned to head back to the front, and that's when it happened again. Crash. This time it came from the opposite end of the store. It was loud, something hard and plastic hitting the floor. It sounded like it came from aisle 2 or 3. The toy section. I froze in place. My mouth went bone dry, and goosebumps crawled up my arms. Is someone in here? I called out again, my voice louder and more frantic. I could hear the sound of my own shallow breathing. There was no answer. I knew I had to check, even if it was just a kid messing around or someone who had managed to slip past the entrance bell. It was my responsibility. I had to look. I made my way across the store, trying to move as quietly as possible. When I reached aisle 2, I stopped cold. In the middle of the aisle lay a bright red toy truck, flipped upside down. Behind it, a stuffed unicorn with a missing eye had been thrown off the shelf. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. Then, I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice: footsteps. They were light, quick, and deliberate, the sound of someone running. But they weren't running toward me, they were running toward the front of the store. Toward the register. I turned and sprinted back the way I came, my shoes slapping loudly against the floor. I rounded the end cap at the front of the store and stopped short. There was a man standing behind the checkout counter. My checkout counter. He had one knee up on the small counter shelf and both hands gripped around the register. I watched, frozen, as he tried to yank the drawer open with hard, quick pulls. It didn't budge. Thank God I had locked it earlier out of habit. The man looked up and saw me. We locked eyes. He didn't say a word. He just turned back to the drawer and started slamming his hand against it. He banged on the side, trying to knock the mechanism loose, then reached underneath to try and lift the entire machine. My voice finally returned. Hey! Stop! I'm calling the cops. The man didn't even flinch. He jumped down, ran to the second register, and tried that one, too. It was also locked. I always made sure they were secure if they weren't in use. I'm calling. I yelled again, backing toward the office door where the landline was located while fumbling in my pocket for my cell phone. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip it. Suddenly, the man gave up. He threw something small, maybe a pen, at the counter, then bolted straight for the front door. The bell rang as he yanked it open and vanished into the night. I ran to the door and turned the lock immediately. I didn't care that there were still 15 minutes left before closing. We were done. I stood there, staring out the glass window, trying to steady my breathing. The parking lot was pitch black. A single flickering light illuminated a small patch of the sidewalk, but I couldn't see where he had gone. I called 911, and the police arrived about 10 minutes later. I walked them through the entire ordeal. They searched the store and asked for the security footage. I told them I wasn't authorized to access it, but that my manager would follow up in the morning. They wrote up a report and left. The man was never found. As far as I know, he never came back. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The worst part wasn't the attempted robbery, it was the realization that I never knew he was there. He must have been hiding in the store long before I started closing, crouched between shelves or ducked into the stockroom when I wasn't looking. He had been silent, patient, and waiting. It still haunts me how close he was the entire time, how well he hid, and how I never even saw him until he decided to show himself. I quit a few weeks later. I told my manager I had found a job closer to home, but the truth was that I just didn't feel safe anymore, not in that building, and certainly not alone at night. Sometimes, when I walk past a Dollar Tree now, even in broad daylight, I feel that same chill creep over me. I remember the quiet, that unnatural, waiting kind of quiet. The kind that hides something that isn't quite gone. We all think we're alone when a store goes quiet, but what if the shadows are actually watching you? That night in Redfield, I wasn't just working a shift, I was being hunted by someone who had been hiding feet away from me for hours. He didn't just want the money, he wanted to see how long he could stay invisible. If you've ever felt like you were being watched in an empty room, you might be right. Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true stories from the edge of reality. And remember, just because you can't see them, doesn't mean they aren't there. I'll see you in the next story, if you're brave enough to come back. But that changed after I moved into a small rental duplex in a new part of town. It was tucked behind a highway ramp, sandwiched between an old laundromat and a string of fast food joints. The rent was cheap, and so were the neighbors, the kind of people who minded their own business, unless you accidentally parked in their spot. If you did, you'd definitely hear about it, usually via a passive-aggressive sticky note. It was a Tuesday evening when I finally decided to check out the Dollar Tree a few blocks away. I had just finished work, and the thought of driving to a massive big-box store felt exhausting. I needed basic groceries, paper towels, and a plastic bin for my closet, so I figured, why not? It was already dark outside, not late, probably around 8:45 p.m., but the winter sky made everything feel like midnight. I remember pulling on my hoodie and grabbing a canvas tote bag. I felt a bit too tired for errands, but I knew I had to get them done. The Dollar Tree parking lot was mostly empty, with only 4 or 5 cars scattered about. The overhead lamps buzzed faintly, casting long shadows that seemed to shift even when nothing was moving. I parked close to the entrance, right under the buzzing yellow sign, Dollar Tree. Everything's $1.25. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed how unnervingly quiet it was. The only sounds were the distant hum of the freezers and a faint, low-energy pop song filtering through broken ceiling speakers. An older man stood at the register flipping through a flyer, and a bored-looking teenage girl leaned against a Valentine's candy display. She gave me a routine smile as I walked in, and I nodded back. I grabbed a green cart with a wobbly front wheel and began making my way through the aisles. There were maybe 3 other shoppers in the entire store. One woman with a crying toddler was near the school supplies. A guy who looked like a mechanic, covered in grease, was grabbing off-brand soda. And then there was a third woman I noticed almost immediately, mostly because she gave me a strange vibe from the start. She was tall, probably in her late 30s, wearing a faded denim jacket and a red beanie. Her expression was unreadable, as if she were lost in a thought that was just out of reach. She hovered in the toy aisle for a long time, pretending to scan the shelves, but she was clearly focused on something, or someone, else. I made a mental note of her and moved on. I was in the back corner of the store near the freezer section when I spotted her again. She wasn't shopping. She was watching. She wasn't just casually glancing at people, she was observing, like she was keeping tabs on everyone's movements. Having worked late shifts in various jobs, I knew what that behavior usually meant. She was either casing the place to steal something or looking for someone specific. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I grabbed a frozen pizza and a bag of mixed vegetables and wheeled my cart around to the next aisle. That's when I heard a strange thump. I paused. The sound had come from behind me, back toward the coolers. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't a normal store noise either. I turned around, and that's when I saw her. She was climbing. I'm not exaggerating. She had both hands on top of one of the tall freezers and was hoisting herself up as if it were the edge of a swimming pool. Her foot slipped on one of the lower racks, sending a few cans rolling across the linoleum floor, but she didn't seem to care. I blinked in total confusion. What the hell is she doing? I whispered to myself. She made it all the way up and disappeared into the dark gap between the top of the freezer and the ceiling. That's when it hit me, she wasn't just climbing, she was hiding. Excuse me. I called out, though I wasn't even sure why I was talking to her. Maybe I thought she was disoriented or just unstable. She didn't answer. Instead, her head popped over the edge of the freezer and her eyes locked onto mine, wide, wild, and unblinking. What are you doing up there? I asked. She tilted her head. Just needed a second, she muttered. Her voice was low and gravelly, as if she hadn't spoken in hours. By now, other people were starting to notice. The mother pulled her child closer. The guy in the soda aisle stopped what he was doing and leaned out to get a better look. Then it happened. Without any warning, the woman stood upright on top of the freezer, walked 3 or 4 paces, and jumped. She landed right on my cart. The metal collapsed under her weight with a sound like a slow-motion wreck. My groceries spilled everywhere, cans rolled, boxes tore open, and frozen peas skittered across the tile. I stumbled back in shock, my hands out. Are you serious right now? She didn't even flinch. She stood up, brushed off her pants, and looked right at me. Wrong cart, she said, sounding almost amused. What is wrong with you? I snapped. She didn't answer. She just turned and jogged away as if nothing had happened. The store erupted into whispers. Some people laughed nervously, while others just stood there in stunned silence. One of the workers, a stocky guy in a green apron, ran after her shouting, "Ma'am, you cannot be doing that." She didn't stop. She ran to the front of the store, shoved the door open, and disappeared into the dark. I knelt down and started collecting my scattered items. The cashier came over to help, looking visibly shaken. "She's been in here before," he muttered. "Always weird, always muttering to herself. Does she do that every time?" I asked, trying to laugh but not really feeling it. "Not that," he said, nodding toward my mangled cart. "That's new. I bought what I could salvage and checked out." As I left, I scanned the parking lot, half expecting to see her lurking near the exit, but she was gone. I headed to a gas station nearby, my tank was low, and I figured I should top it off before heading home. The whole incident was still replaying in my head, the unblinking stare, the jump, and the absolute audacity of it all. I pulled into the gas station, filled my tank, and went inside to grab a drink. That's when I saw her again. She was standing near the beer fridge, rifling through her pockets with that same dazed, wild expression. I didn't wait around. I quietly backed out before she could spot me and drove off fast. I wasn't about to tempt fate. I was only 5 minutes from home when I noticed the flashing lights. There were police cars, lots of them. I slowed down, confused, as an officer motioned for me to pull off to the side of the road. Up ahead, I saw another officer laying a set of spike strips across the pavement. What the hell is going on? I wondered. Then, I heard sirens behind me, followed by a blur of movement. A car shot past me, nearly clipping my bumper. It was the same car I had seen her get into earlier, and she was driving like a bat out of hell. The police reacted instantly. Her car hit the spikes, the tires shredded, and the vehicle fishtailed violently across the road before skidding into a ditch. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs, as officers swarmed the wreck. They pulled her out. She fought at first, clawing and screaming, but they subdued her quickly. Her red beanie fell to the ground, and her wild hair spilled out like black ink. It was her. It was definitely her. Later that week, I saw the story on the news. Her name was Angela Ditt, 39 years old. She had multiple warrants for petty theft, assault, and breaking and entering. Most shockingly, she had escaped from a psychiatric facility 2 towns over a month earlier, and they had been searching for her ever since. She had been squatting in abandoned houses and living out of her car, hitting several small stores that week to steal food, clothes, and medicine. I guess Dollar Tree was just her latest stop. I don't shop late anymore. It's not that I'm afraid, not exactly. But I've learned that the quietest aisles can hold the loudest dangers. The scariest thing about a stranger isn't what they do, it's what they're capable of when they have nothing left to lose. Angela Ditt wasn't just a shoplifter, she was a woman on the edge of a total breakdown, hiding in the rafters and waiting for the right moment to strike. You might think you're just running a quick errand, but you never know who is watching you from above the freezer aisle. If this story kept you looking over your shoulder, hit that like button and subscribe for more true horror. Stay safe, stay alert, and I'll see you in the next one. It wasn't just the jump that stayed with me, it was what I saw in her eyes that night. There was something unhinged but also deeply desperate there, the look of someone who didn't know who they were anymore and didn't care what they did next. That is a terrifying kind of person to encounter, someone with absolutely nothing to lose. She didn't just jump onto a plastic cart, she jumped into a part of my brain that refuses to stop replaying weird, surreal, and dangerous memories. So, yes, I still shop at Dollar Tree, but I never go alone, and I never, ever go at night. I never thought working a minimum wage retail job could be dangerous. Inconvenient? Yes. Boring? Absolutely. But life-threatening? That wasn't something I expected when I took the night shift at Dollar Haven, a small, off-brand dollar store tucked behind a worn-down gas station on the edge of Lenora, Kansas. Back then, I was 22. For the sake of this story, you can call me Madison. I had moved to Lenora to live with my Aunt Tina after my mom passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. I was broke, emotionally wrecked, and just trying to rebuild my life. Aunt Tina didn't have much, but she gave me a room in her trailer and let me stay rent-free as long as I helped with the groceries. When Dollar Haven called me for a night shift cashier position, I took it without hesitation. Like most small-town places, the store was severely understaffed. After only a couple of weeks, I was working solo 3 or 4 nights a week. I'd clock in around 4:30 p.m., clean and stock for a bit, and then man the register until we closed at 10 o'clock. After that, I'd sweep, restock, and count the drawer alone until locking up at 10:45. The job was simple. The people, however, were not. It started one night in early November. The air had that dry, sharp bite to it, and the store's heater clicked constantly as if it were on its last legs. I was halfway through my shift when a man walked in. He was of average height, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a tan Carhartt jacket and facial stubble that was bordering on a full beard. His eyes. I don't know how else to put it, but they didn't blink enough. I looked up and gave the usual, "Hi, welcome in," and received a strange, lingering pause in return. He didn't say a word, he just looked around the store slowly, almost as if he were memorizing the layout. Then, he disappeared into aisle 5. I brushed it off. Weirdos were a standard part of the job. However, I noticed that he wasn't actually grabbing anything. He was just pacing up and down the aisles, barely touching the products. 15 minutes later, he finally approached the counter with 2 energy drinks and a phone charger. He didn't set them down right away. "You work here every night?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Most nights," I replied, scanning the drinks. "You live around here?" I paused. Sort of. Do you need a bag? He leaned in a little closer. You got a boyfriend? Right then, my stomach turned. I gave a tight-lipped smile. I'm just trying to finish my shift. He didn't take the hint. You should let me take you out after you're off. I'll wait. I shook my head. No, thanks. You sure? I got a real nice truck. There was that weird grin again. I handed him his change and the receipt, praying he would just leave. He didn't. He lingered for another 30 seconds, just watching me. Finally, when another customer walked in behind him, he turned and walked out. No goodbye, just gone. I thought that was the end of it, just another creep hitting on the cashier. It happens more often than people realize. But about an hour before closing, the door chimed again. I looked up, and my heart sank. It was him. Same jacket, same dead-eyed stare. This time, he didn't even pretend to shop. He walked straight up to the counter. You off work yet? He asked, as if we were old friends. No, I said, forcing my voice to stay firm. He glanced around the empty store. I'll wait. Can't be long now. The only other people in the store were two teenage girls over in the snack aisle. I felt braver with witnesses present. Listen, I'm not interested. Please stop hanging around. You need to leave now. His expression didn't change. You'll change your mind. I always get what I want. Then, just like that, he walked out calmly. No argument. But as he pushed the door open, he added, I'll find out more about you. My blood turned cold. 3 nights later, he was back. It was a Wednesday, slow and dead. He walked in with total confidence, strolled right up to the counter, and said, Hello, Madison Reed. He said it with a grin, like he was enjoying a private joke. I didn't wear a name tag, I never had. Management didn't care, and I'd even checked to make sure my last name wasn't on anything visible around the register. How do you know my name? I asked, my voice trembling. I have friends. They know things. Small town. He winked and turned to leave. That was it, no purchase, no attempt to flirt. Just the name drop. It rattled me to the core. After he left, I went into the back room and locked the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. I called the store manager, April, but she brushed it off. He's probably just bluffing, she said. Just keep an eye out. I'll file a note about it, but unless he does something, we can't do much. I started walking to my car with a box cutter gripped in my jacket pocket every night after that. That Friday, after a normal shift, I drove home. Aunt Tina was working nights at the diner, so the trailer was dark and quiet when I got in. I made some noodles, watched a bit of TV, and around midnight, just as I was starting to doze off, there was a knock. It wasn't a light knock. It was a hard, slow thump. I froze. I peeked through the front blinds, and my stomach dropped. He was standing on the porch. He knocked again, then tried the handle. The screen door creaked open, but the main door held. Madison, I know you're home, he said through the wood. The most dangerous person isn't the one who yells, it's the one who stays calm while they dismantle your life. He didn't just want a date, he wanted control, and he spent days learning the one thing that would terrify me most, my identity. When no isn't enough to stop a predator, where do you turn? If you want to hear how this nightmare ended and what I had to do to survive that night in the trailer, make sure you're subscribed. And remember, check your locks tonight. You never know who's been watching from the aisles. See you in the next one. I didn't answer. I backed away and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped it as I dialed 911. He didn't stop talking. You shouldn't be alone. Not this late. I saw your aunt leave earlier. That was the breaking point. He wasn't just guessing, he had been watching the trailer. He knew my aunt's schedule. Please send someone, I whispered to the dispatcher. He's trying to get in. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. He just stood there on the other side of that flimsy deadbolt, talking into the wood. Finally, red and blue lights cut through the darkness of the trailer park. He didn't run. He didn't protest. He just stood there with that same, unnerving grin as the officers approached. The police told him he had to leave, but they said he wasn't technically doing anything illegal yet. They issued a trespass warning and sent him on his way. That was it. I stopped working closing shifts immediately. I practically begged April to switch me to afternoons, and she finally agreed. For a few weeks, things felt almost normal. But the real horror was still waiting to surface. One afternoon, I overheard a regular customer, Miss Carla, whispering with her daughter near the greeting cards. "You hear about that girl from Hutchinson? That poor thing got grabbed walking home. Police say she was working nights at that little gas station off Route 3. The name Lexi hit me like a physical blow. I knew her. We had trained together at a sister store a few towns over. She was 22, just like me. What happened?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "They found her in the back of a trailer 2 days later," Miss Carla said, shaking her head. "They said the guy kept her tied up, thought she was someone else, a prostitute or something. God help her." Everything clicked. A week before Lexi went missing, she told me about a guy who kept showing up at her job, asking weird questions and claiming she looked like someone he used to pay. I started digging. I scrubbed my Facebook, changed every privacy setting, and deleted my last name. Then I found it, an old photo from a work party months ago. Lexi and I were tagged together, arms slung around each other, smiling. Our full names were right there in the caption. It wasn't a coincidence. He hadn't just stumbled upon me, he was targeting a specific type, and he had used that photo to bridge the gap from Lexi to me. I went straight to the sheriff. This time, with Lexi's case as a backdrop, they didn't just file a report. They listened. The internet doesn't just connect friends, it connects predators to their next victim. One tagged photo was all it took for a monster to turn a workplace coincidence into a literal hunt. I was lucky I had a deadbolt, Lexi wasn't. We like to think our private lives are safe, but in a small town, a name drop is a death threat. If you've ever been tagged in a photo with a friend, you might want to double check who's looking at it tonight. Like, subscribe, and stay hidden. I'll see you in the next story. It turned out a man named Curtis Leland had been a suspect in several harassment cases. Nothing ever stuck, but the pattern was there. They didn't have to look for long. They found him living in a camper on a piece of land 10 miles out of town. Inside, they found a wall covered in photos of women, me, Lexi, and others I didn't even recognize. He had printed our social media pictures and written notes under them. Some of them included our home addresses. They also found zip ties, duct tape, and a burner phone. Lexi's case was still active, but she was able to confirm that Curtis was the man who had taken her. He is now in custody, awaiting trial for kidnapping, harassment, and stalking. I quit Dollar Haven 2 weeks later. I moved out of Aunt Tina's and left Lenora altogether. I changed my number and started over. I never figured out exactly why me, whether he mistook me for someone else or if I was just another name on a list. It doesn't matter. What matters is that he watched me, he followed me, and I survived. But I still think about what would have happened if I hadn't locked that door that night. If I'd walked to my car just 5 minutes later. If Lexi hadn't been found alive. There are predators out there, and sometimes they wear Carhartt jackets and buy energy drinks. I hadn't always lived alone. But after moving out of my sister's place last winter, I finally got my own one-bedroom apartment in a quiet town called Merrow Creek. It wasn't a big place, just a few stoplights, a handful of fast food joints, and one of everything else, one gas station, one laundromat, and one Dollar Tree tucked between a hardware store and a shuttered video rental place. It wasn't anything special, but the rent was cheap, and I liked the independence. I was only a 10-minute walk from the Dollar Tree, and I usually went there for the small stuff, dish soap, snacks, paper towels. I'd gone there enough that I knew the aisles like the back of my hand. This story happened not long ago. We like to think our homes are our fortresses, but for Curtis Leland, my front door was just a finish line he'd been sprinting toward for weeks. He didn't just want my name, he wanted my life. If you have your social media set to public, you might be handing a predator the map straight to your porch. Lock your profiles, lock your doors, and never assume a weird customer is just a weirdo. If this story chilled you, hit that subscribe button for more. Stay safe out there, because some people don't just shop for deals, they shop for victims. See you in the next one. I don't like talking about it often because, well, it made me start second-guessing the safety I thought I had. It made me realize that no matter how quiet or safe a town might seem, all it takes is one person to change everything. It started on a regular afternoon around 3:30 p.m. It was bright, breezy, and not too hot. I had just finished laundry and realized I was low on trash bags and dish soap. Rather than drive, I decided to walk. I had my earbuds in, but I didn't turn the volume up too high. I always like to be aware of my surroundings, especially when walking alone. I headed down my street, cut across an empty parking lot behind the post office, and soon reached the Dollar Tree. The store was about half full, quiet enough to not feel busy, but not empty enough to feel weird. I didn't notice anyone in particular, just a mom with two kids, a couple of teenagers arguing near the snack aisle, and an older man pacing near the cold drinks. I didn't feel uneasy or watched at all. I grabbed what I needed, waited in line behind a lady using coupons, and paid with a few crumpled bills. After that, I stepped outside, turned right, and started walking home the same way I had come. It should have been uneventful. The air smelled like fresh grass and gasoline, and everything was so normal that my only concern was whether I wanted to make pasta or just eat a frozen pizza for dinner. I was maybe a block past the Dollar Tree when I heard the tires. A car pulled out from the parking lot, a white, mid-size sedan. I didn't think anything of it until I noticed how slowly it was moving. At first, I figured the driver was just trying to figure out which way to go. But then I realized something that made my stomach twist. The car wasn't just driving slowly. It was matching my pace perfectly. Every time I slowed down to adjust the heavy bag of trash bags in my hand, the car slowed down too. Every time I sped up, the engine revved just enough to stay right beside me. The car wasn't just moving slowly. It was matching my pace. I glanced sideways, pretending to look at my phone, and caught a glimpse of the driver. He was a man, maybe in his late 30s or 40s, balding slightly, wearing dark sunglasses and a gray hoodie. I didn't recognize him, not even a flicker of familiarity. Then he did something that made my heart stutter. He rolled his window down. "Hey," he barked. It wasn't friendly, and he didn't sound confused. It was sharp. "Get in." I blinked. At first, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible while I kept walking. "I said, get in," he repeated. "Hurry up." There was no smile, no hint that he had mistaken me for someone else. It was just a flat command, like I was already supposed to know what he wanted. I took a step away from the street toward the sidewalk's edge. "Do I know you?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he leaned across the passenger seat and said, "You need to get in now." That was when I knew something was seriously wrong. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I turned the corner at the next block, even though it was out of the way. The car paused for just a second, then turned too. I picked up my pace. So did he. I could hear the crunch of his tires on the pavement behind me, creeping along like he was stalking prey. I didn't want to run just yet. I didn't want to show him I was panicked, but the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. The most terrifying words isn't a threat, it's a command from a stranger who thinks they own you. This man didn't ask for directions, he didn't even use a name. He spoke like my safety wasn't even an option. In a town like Merrow Creek, you expect peace, but I was 1 block away from a nightmare. If you want to know how I escaped a car that wouldn't stop following me, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for part 2. And remember, if a car matches your pace, never stop walking. I'll see you in the next one. I didn't want to show him my fear. My mind raced through the layout of the town, which streets led where, which direction offered an escape. I kept walking fast, then made a sharp turn down a narrow alleyway between 2 brick buildings. It was a tight squeeze, just wide enough for a person or a bike, but definitely too narrow for a car. That was my chance. As soon as I turned the corner, I broke into a full-on sprint. My breath caught in my throat, and the sound of my sneakers echoed sharply against the brick walls. I didn't stop until I reached the other side. I pressed myself against the wall and peeked out onto the street. No car. I waited 30 seconds, then a minute. Nothing. Breathing hard, I stepped out and started moving again, making sure to avoid my regular route. I zigzagged through side streets, checking over my shoulder every few seconds, my eyes scanning for that white paint. Just as I was starting to feel the tension bleed out, I saw it. The white car was coming from the other end of the block. My pulse spiked. He must have circled around, waited, or simply guessed where I'd come out. I couldn't believe it, this guy was still hunting me. On pure instinct, I turned and sprinted toward a random house. There was no time to think. I ran across the lawn, hopped a short wooden fence, and dived behind a thick bush in the side yard. I crouched there, making myself as small as possible. Through the leaves, I watched the white sedan roll slowly past the house. The brake lights flickered for a terrifying moment, then it rolled on. I stayed hidden until the sound of the engine faded. Then I bolted again. I cut through another yard, across a back alley, over another fence, and finally reached a street I recognized. My building was close. When I reached the front entrance, I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so hard they rattled against the lock. I let myself in and heard the heavy click of the door locking automatically behind me. No one gets in without a key or a buzz-in. I ran up the stairs to the 3rd floor, burst into my apartment, and threw every single bolt. Then I heard it. The low, rhythmic thrum of a car engine. I walked over to the window and looked down. The white sedan was idling on the other side of the street. I watched, frozen, as the driver got out, looked up at the building, and started walking straight toward my front entrance. The scariest thing about a stalker isn't the chase, it's the moment they stop chasing and start waiting. He didn't need to catch me on the street because he had already found where I slept. I was locked behind 3 bolts, but through the window, I was looking right at a man who wasn't going to take no for an answer. If you want to hear how I got the police to finally take this seriously and who that man actually was, subscribe for the final part of the Merrow Creek mystery. And please, if you're walking home today, don't just look behind you, look at who's waiting at the finish line. See you in the next one. He pulled on the handle. It didn't open. He pulled again. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned, walked back to his car, and drove away. He didn't run. He didn't act like he was panicking. He just strolled. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he had been watching me in the store or if it was entirely random. I don't even know if he followed me all the way home because he recognized me or if he just guessed right. But I haven't walked to that Dollar Tree since. I've changed my routines, started taking Ubers, and I've even considered moving. Every little sound outside my apartment now makes my heart race. I never reported it. What would I even say? A man tried to get me into his car. There was no license plate, no name, and no security footage that I knew of. All I know is that something very real happened. And I'm lucky I trusted my instincts, because something tells me if I had gotten into that car, I wouldn't be here to tell you this. I was never the type of guy to talk much at work. You could chalk that up to my job or maybe just who I am. I've been in retail management for most of my adult life. I ran my own little logistics company back in my 20s, but after it folded during the recession, I spent years bouncing around from store to store. Big chains, small shops, you name it. Eventually, I ended up at a Family Dollar in a mid-sized town just a few hours from where I grew up. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent. And for once, I didn't have the pressure of running the whole damn show. That was a relief. I lived just a few blocks from the store in a modest apartment complex, a 2-story brick building with creaky stairs and the occasional loud neighbor, but the rent was cheap and the commute was short. I was in my early 40s, divorced, and mostly kept to myself. I didn't drink, and I didn't party. My life was quiet. Until it wasn't. In retail, we're trained to spot shoplifters and Karens, but we aren't trained for the people who follow us home. The man in the white sedan didn't just want a ride, he wanted to see if the door was unlocked. He was patient, he was calm, and he was terrifyingly close to succeeding. If you've ever felt that wrong feeling while walking alone, listen to it. It might be the only thing that saves you. Like and subscribe to keep these stories alive. And for the next chapter, we're heading into the life of a man who thought his quiet routine was his shield, until someone decided to break it. I'll see you in the next one. I liked things quiet. The store was understaffed, like most retail places. Usually, only 2 or 3 of us worked each shift. One of the guys on the schedule with me fairly often was named Chris. Chris was odd. He was a big guy, strong-looking, maybe in his mid-30s. He always wore this fraying black hoodie with the sleeves pulled halfway down over his hands, the type of guy who looked like he didn't know how to smile. We weren't friends, not by any stretch. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was short and stiff. Sometimes I'd try to strike up a little conversation, just something simple like, "Slow night, huh?" and he'd either grunt or give some deadpan reply before going back to whatever he was doing. At first, I figured he was just shy or socially awkward. It happens. I let it go. We got through our shifts in mostly silence, and he was a decent enough worker, showed up on time and didn't complain. That was good enough for me. Until one night changed everything. That day started off normal. I worked an evening shift with a younger girl named Tammy. She was bubbly and talkative, covering most of the register work while I handled stocking and prepping the next day's freight. Chris wasn't on the schedule. I remember that clearly because Tammy even mentioned it, said it was nice to have normal energy around for once. The store was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. We were about an hour from closing when the front door chimed. I didn't even look up from the pallet I was breaking down until I heard Tammy's voice drop. "Oh, hey, Chris. You're not working tonight, right?" I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. Chris was standing by the register, but he didn't have his vest on. He was just in that same black hoodie, the hood pulled low over his eyes. He didn't look at Tammy. He was looking at me. In retail, your coworkers are the only people you're supposed to trust when the doors lock. But what happens when the person you've spent dozens of silent shifts with shows up on his night off with a look in his eyes you've never seen before? Chris wasn't there for a shift, and he wasn't there to shop. He was there because the silence between us was about to be broken in the most violent way possible. If you want to know what Chris was hiding under those long hoodie sleeves, hit that like button and subscribe for part 2. I'll see you in the next one. I half laughed and agreed with Tammy. The shift had been a breeze. After we closed at 9 p.m., I did my quick lock-up routine and started the walk back to my apartment. It was a peaceful 10-minute stroll through the residential area, past the darkened storefronts, and down that shortcut alley behind the old laundromat. I always liked the night air. It was cool and gave me space to decompress. By 9:30 p.m., I was home. I tossed a frozen meal in the microwave, kicked off my shoes, and settled in with some TV reruns. Since I didn't have an early start the next day, I stayed up later than usual. Midnight rolled around, and I was still on the couch with the lights dimmed, mindlessly scrolling through my phone. Then, the knock came. It was loud. Sharp. Firm. I sat bolt upright, my pulse instantly quickening. I thought maybe I'd imagined it until it happened again, 3 heavy, deliberate knocks against the wood. Nobody knocks at midnight, not in this building. Not unless something is very wrong. My first thought was a neighbor, maybe someone was locked out or there was an emergency. I stood up slowly and crept toward the door. Keeping the chain latch engaged, I leaned in and looked through the peephole. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. It was Chris. He was standing right there, inches from my door. He wasn't knocking anymore, he was just standing. His hood was pulled up, his face was a total blank, and his eyes were fixed forward, staring at the door as if he could see right through it. He wasn't looking around or checking his phone. He was perfectly still. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My heart was thumping against my ribs with that sickening rhythm that tells you you're in danger before your brain can even process why. There was no reason, absolutely zero, for Chris to be at my home. I had never given him my address. We had never even talked about where I lived. The most terrifying thing about a coworker isn't a bad attitude, it's realizing they've been following you home in the dark. Chris wasn't just odd. He was a predator who had been silently mapping my life while I thought we were just stocking shelves. He was standing on the other side of a piece of wood, waiting for me to turn the handle. If you've ever felt a chill when a coworker asks too many questions about your commute, trust that feeling. Subscribe now to find out what happened when I realized he wasn't going to leave. I'll see you in the next one. He didn't live in my building. I had never told him where I lived. Hell, I'd barely spoken to him outside of work. I didn't answer the door. I just stood there, paralyzed, watching through the peephole. He didn't leave, not for a long time. He just stood there in the silence. The hallway light flickered once while he was there, and I swear it felt like I was trapped in a dream, one of those nightmares where someone is outside and you can't tell if they can see you or not, but they just won't go away. Finally, he left. There was no final knock, no words. He just turned and walked off down the hallway, disappearing from view. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I showed up to work with barely 5 hours of sleep in me. I'd spent the early hours trying to convince myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he had a benign reason to be there. A drunk cousin in the building? A weird coincidence. But when I walked into the break room and saw Chris standing there, my stomach twisted into a knot. He looked the same as always. Hoodie on, face blank. He didn't even say, "Hey." Eventually, when the store was slow, I approached him, keeping my voice as casual as I could manage. "Hey, were you at my apartment last night?" He turned to look at me. It was that same dead stare. "What?" I repeated myself, explaining slowly. "I saw you. You were outside my door. Around midnight." He shook his head. "Wasn't me. Chris, I saw you. You were standing right there." You didn't say anything, just stood there for like 5 minutes. I was home, he said. Didn't leave. He said it so flatly, like he was reading from a script. Then he added, maybe it was someone who looked like me. Or maybe you were dreaming. That last part got under my skin. He said it too smoothly, too rehearsed. I didn't push it, something told me not to. After that day, I never worked with Chris again. A few shifts passed, and then his name simply disappeared from the schedule. One of the assistant managers mentioned he had quit, but they didn't say why. Nobody seemed to know anything more than that. He was just gone. I wanted to tell someone what had happened. I really did. But it felt stupid. I mean, what could I even say? Hey, I think this guy might have come to my apartment uninvited and then lied about it. The only thing scarier than a stalker who threatens you is a stalker who gaslights you. Chris didn't just stand outside my door. He tried to make me believe I was losing my mind. When he disappeared from the schedule, the relief was huge, but the questions remained. How did he find me? And who else's door is he standing in front of tonight? If you've ever had a coworker make you question your own reality, you aren't alone. Subscribe for more true retail horror. And remember, just because they're gone, doesn't mean they aren't still watching. I'll see you in the next one. There was no proof. Nothing had actually happened. He didn't break in, and he hadn't hurt me. But it didn't sit right. Weeks went by, and life went back to normal, sort of. I started locking my door with obsessive care. I kept a flashlight and a kitchen knife in the drawer next to my bed. I started noticing small sounds at night more than I ever used to. And then, just when I thought I was being paranoid, it happened again. One night around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise. Not a knock this time, just footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate ones in the hallway right outside my door. Then, silence. I got up quietly, my heart thudding against my ribs. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. But the next morning, I noticed something I hadn't before, a smudge on the peephole glass, like someone had pressed their forehead directly against it for a long time. I installed a security camera the next day, just a cheap one that connected to my phone. I felt a little safer for a while. Nothing showed up on it for days. Until one night, I got a notification while I was at work. Motion detected. When I checked the footage, my blood ran cold. The feed showed the hallway outside my apartment, empty. Then, a few seconds in, the camera glitched, a burst of static for less than a second, then it snapped back to the empty hall. I scrolled back and paused it, frame by frame. For just that split second, a single frame froze on my screen. It was Chris. He was standing in front of my door, staring directly into the lens. I quit Family Dollar the following week. I didn't tell anyone why, I just said I was relocating for personal reasons. I packed my life into a few boxes and moved to a different town in a different state to start over. It's been a year since then. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted. Sometimes I wonder if I didn't react fast enough. Because every once in a while, in the middle of the night, I still think I hear a heavy, rhythmic knocking. And when I look through the peephole now, I don't always feel alone. The scariest part of a ghost story isn't the ghost, it's the person who refuses to leave. Chris didn't need to break my door down to ruin my sense of safety, he just needed to make sure I knew he was there, even when the camera said he wasn't. We trust our technology and our locks, but sometimes, the things following us are more persistent than any deadbolt. If you've ever looked through your peephole and felt like someone was looking back, don't wait for a sign to leave. Subscribe for more true stories that prove the most dangerous place is the one you call home. I'll see you in the next one. I never thought much about working at a place like Dollar Tree. I took the job because I needed something flexible and close to home. This was a few years back when I was living in a small apartment on Elmwood Street, just off Westview Avenue. The store was barely 5 minutes away. I could walk there, but most days I drove because I usually worked closing shifts and didn't want to walk home in the dark. The Dollar Tree itself was nothing special, just one of those small stores tucked into a strip mall, squeezed between a nail salon and a tax place that was only open during the season. The lights inside always had that faint, annoying buzz, and the break room constantly smelled like a mix of popcorn and bleach. We were always short-staffed. Most nights, it was just one person on the register and maybe another in the back, if we were lucky. My name's Tessa, by the way. I was 24 at the time, just trying to stay afloat, living alone and dealing with the usual stack of bills and too little sleep. The job was simple, and honestly, I didn't mind it. You see all kinds of people come through a place like that. But this story, this one night, sticks with me in a way nothing else has. It was late autumn, the kind of evening where the sun sets too early and by 5 p.m., it already looks like midnight outside. I was working a solo shift, which wasn't unusual. The manager, Paula, had left after the shipment came in that morning, and no one else was scheduled for the evening. It was quiet, just a few customers trickling in every now and then. Around 4:30 p.m., I remember a man walking in. There wasn't anything especially odd about him at first glance. He had long, greasy brown hair tucked behind his ears and wore a thick pair of sunglasses, even though it was already dim outside. I greeted him like I did everyone else. "Hi, welcome in." He didn't say anything. He didn't even nod. He just walked straight to the back of the store, his boots echoing loudly on the linoleum. I watched him for a second, but then a lady came up with a handful of holiday decorations, and I got busy. About 10 minutes passed. I realized I hadn't seen the man with the sunglasses come back toward the front. I leaned over the counter, trying to see down the aisles. The store was small enough that you could usually see someone if they were moving around. But the back of the store was dead quiet. I decided to do a quick lap, pretending to tidy up the shelves. When I got to the toy aisle, I saw him. He was standing perfectly still, facing the wall. He wasn't looking at the toys. He was staring at the emergency exit door at the back of the building. The most dangerous customers aren't the ones who cause a scene, they're the ones who stand perfectly still. Sunglasses in the dark and a strange fascination with the exits are signs that someone isn't there to shop, they're there to plan. Tessa was alone in that store, and the man in the back wasn't looking for a bargain, he was looking for a way out, or perhaps a way in. If you want to know what happened when the sun finally went down and the store went quiet, hit that subscribe button for part 2. Stay alert, and I'll see you in the next one. "Yeah, that is weird," Jamie said, her voice dropping an octave. "Tessa, just keep the doors locked if nobody is in there. Is he still looking at you?" I glanced toward the front window, trying to be discreet. He was a minute ago. Now he's just staring at the ground. It's like he's waiting for something. "Call Paula," Jamie urged. "Or the non-emergency line. Don't wait until you have to leave at 9. We hung up, and the silence of the store felt heavier than before. The humming of the freezer cases, which I usually tuned out, sounded like a low-pitched roar in my ears. I stayed behind the register, using the high counter as a shield. I grabbed a duster and started aggressively cleaning the tobacco shelf just to look busy, but my eyes kept darting back to those front glass doors. Then, the man moved. He didn't walk away. He stepped closer to the glass. He leaned his forehead against the pane, his hands stuffed deep into his jacket pockets. Even with the sunglasses on, I could tell he was scanning the interior of the store, tracking where I was. My heart hammered against my ribs. I picked up the store phone to call Paula, but before I could finish dialing, the front door chimed. A group of 3 teenagers piled in, laughing and shoving each other. The man immediately stepped back, melting into the shadows of the sidewalk as the kids walked past. The normalcy they brought with them felt like a life raft. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then I realized, they were going to leave eventually. And when they did, I'd be alone again. I watched the man through the window while the teenagers headed for the candy aisle. He wasn't looking at the store anymore. He was looking at my car, the only one parked in the side lot directly under the flickering street lamp. The only thing worse than a predator who follows you is one who waits for you to come to them. He wasn't just loitering, he was timing me. He saw when the manager left, he saw when the rush ended, and now he was looking at my only way out. When the welcome chime becomes a warning bell, you know you're in trouble. If you want to see how I got out of that store without him catching me, make sure you're subscribed for part 2. Stay safe, and never ignore that feeling in your gut. I'll see you in the next one. You're alone, right? Yeah, I replied, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted. Lock the doors the second you close. Call me if anything weird happens. I will. By 9 p.m., it was time. I walked to the front, turned the heavy deadbolt, and flipped the open sign to closed. As I did, I saw him. He was standing maybe 15 feet to the right, his silhouette sharp against the streetlights. I grabbed my purse from under the counter and clicked off the small radio behind me. The sudden silence was deafening. I went through the motions, counting the cash, locking the drawer, a quick sweep, but my mind was already in the parking lot. I stepped outside at 9:15. The cold air hit my face, and my heartbeat kicked up a notch. I kept my keys threaded between my fingers, walking quickly but trying not to look like I was running. I walked right past him to get to my car. I didn't look at him, but I felt his head turn, tracking me like a radar dish. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it instantly. I started the engine and flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror as I backed out. He hadn't moved an inch. He was just a statue in the dark. About halfway home, I glanced at my dashboard and realized my gas tank was nearly on fumes. I knew I wouldn't make it back to work the next day if I didn't fill up now. Reluctantly, I pulled into a small station on the corner of Maple and 9th. It was an old place, flickering signs, ancient pumps, and a lone attendant behind bulletproof glass. I got out and started the pump, trying to talk myself down. He's just a weird guy, Tessa. Probably lives near the store. You're being paranoid. Then, a minute later, a car pulled into the lot. It was a beat-up blue sedan, missing its front passenger hubcap. It didn't pull up to a pump. It crawled to the side of the building and parked near the dumpsters, facing me. I looked at the driver. My breath caught in my throat. It was him. Same greasy hair, same sunglasses in the dead of night. My hand started to tremble against the cold metal of the gas handle. What the hell was he doing here? Had he followed me without his headlights on? Or was this really just a terrifying coincidence? In a small town, people frequent the same spots, sure, but he hadn't even gotten out to buy gas. He was just sitting there, waiting for me to finish. Coincidence is a luxury you can't afford when your life is on the line. He didn't follow me to the pump, he followed me to a corner where no one was watching. The gas pump was clicking, the seconds were ticking, and the man in the blue sedan was watching me through a windshield of dark glass. If you want to hear the terrifying conclusion of how I got away from the man who wouldn't stop following me, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. And remember, if a car follows you to a second location, don't go home. I'll see you in the next one. The store and the gas station weren't far apart, but he hadn't been driving when I left the Dollar Tree, he was still on foot. So, when did he get in that car? Had it been stashed nearby the whole time? When the gas pump clicked, signaling my tank was full, I returned the nozzle and got back into my car. But I didn't pull away. I sat there for a minute, watching him in my mirrors. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting in that driver's seat, staring toward the station. I decided to go inside, thinking maybe if I grabbed a snack and stayed in the light a little longer, my nerves would settle. I walked in and headed to the snack aisle, picking up a sandwich and a soda. Then I heard the chime. The man had come inside. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I didn't even pretend to browse anymore. I dropped the sandwich right there on the shelf and walked toward the exit. As I neared the door, I saw him turn. I walked faster. So did he. I scrambled into my car, slammed the door shut, and jammed the lock down with my thumb. I turned the engine and reversed out of the spot in one smooth, panicked motion. As I swung out of the lot, I saw him in my peripheral vision rushing back to his car. He was getting in. I made a hard right down Ashmont Street, a quiet residential area, and did something risky. I shut off my headlights. It was hard to see, but I kept the car moving. Slow, careful, blind turns. 2 rights, then a left. No sign of him. I didn't go straight home. I drove in circles for 15 minutes, eyes glued to the mirrors, before finally pulling into my apartment's back lot. I sat there in the dark with the engine off, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it was filling the car. I waited 5 minutes. 10. Silence. No blue car. No sound but the crickets and the hum of a nearby street lamp. After that night, I never saw him again. Not at the store, not around town. I never reported it because, honestly, I didn't know what I'd even say. Some guy bought a drink, stood around, then maybe followed me. It sounded so thin out loud. But I know what I felt. And I know I've never worked a closing shift alone since. The most terrifying part of a close call isn't the danger itself, it's the silence that follows. I never found out who he was or what he wanted, and that's the nightmare that stays with me. Predators don't always strike, sometimes they just practice. They follow, they watch, and they wait for the one night you don't turn off your headlights. If you've ever felt like a coincidence was actually a hunt, trust your gut. It's the only thing that doesn't lie. Hit that like button, subscribe for more true stories, and stay safe in the dark. I'll see you in the next one. But something about him, the silence, the timing, the way he didn't even buy anything at the station, still haunts me. I know I was lucky. He could have done something, and no one would have been there to stop him. To this day, whenever I see a small blue car in a parking lot, I hesitate. I check the rearview mirror a little more than most people because I know that all it takes is one wrong night, one quiet man, and a little too much silence for something awful to happen. I never like shopping late, but sometimes my schedule doesn't leave me with much of a choice. Last year, during the fall, I had just wrapped a photo shoot a few hours earlier. Nothing glamorous, just some catalog work for a regional clothing brand. I do freelance modeling here and there, mostly lifestyle stuff. It's not a huge career yet, but it helps pay the bills while I take my online college courses. That particular day had been long. My feet were aching from being in heels, my makeup was smudged from being on set since 9 a.m., and I was starving. I realized I needed to pick up a few basics: cotton pads, a new lighter, some cheap snacks, and cleaning spray. There's a place near my apartment, a small strip mall with a few shops clustered together. It's not in the best area, but it's familiar. I figured I could stop by Dollar Village. It's basically a knockoff of a Dollar Tree, same green signage, similar layout. I'd only been there a couple of times, but it was open late, and I didn't feel like navigating a giant Target where the crowds are overwhelming and the employees pretend not to see you. It was about 7:30 p.m. when I pulled into the lot. The sun was already down, leaving that deep, bruised purple sky you only see in late October. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a rusted-out pickup truck and a delivery van parked near the far end. One of the streetlights was flickering, casting a rhythmic, nervous light over the asphalt. I grabbed my purse, checked my reflection in the mirror, wincing at my tired eyes, and stepped out into the cool air. As the automatic doors of the Dollar Village slid open with a mechanical groan, I didn't realize that my quick stop was about to become the reason I don't go out after dark anymore. The store was eerily quiet. There was no music, just the hum of the old refrigeration units in the back. I grabbed a red plastic basket and headed for the beauty aisle. That's when I noticed him. He was standing at the end of the aisle, holding a single pack of feminine hygiene products. He wasn't looking at them, though. He was looking at me. Not just a glance, a full, unblinking stare that made the hair on my arms stand up. In my line of work, people look at me for a living, but there's a difference between a camera lens and a predator's gaze. This man wasn't a customer. He was a hunter who had just found his target in the middle of a fluorescent-lit aisle. When you're alone in a store that's short-staffed and tucked away in a bad neighborhood, convenience can quickly turn into a trap. If you want to know how this man used the layout of the store to corner me, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for the next part of the Dollar Village mystery. See you in the next one. The sky was that deep, bruised blue it gets in October, just before full darkness sets in. I remember it clearly because the air had that sharp bite to it, not full-on cold yet, but definitely not summer anymore. The parking lot was nearly empty, with only 3 or 4 cars scattered around, a rusty minivan parked close to the entrance and a small white sedan a few spots down from mine. I didn't think much of it at the time, I was tired and just wanted to get in and out. Inside, the store was quiet, eerily so. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and a single speaker played faint elevator music, the kind that fades into the background so thoroughly it feels like it's coming from inside your own head. I saw maybe 2 other customers, both middle-aged women who looked like they were stocking up on Halloween decorations. There was one employee behind the counter, a short man with dark hair and a heavy 5 o'clock shadow. He looked about my age, maybe late 20s, wearing a lime green Dollar Village vest over a long-sleeve thermal. I gave him a polite nod when I walked in. He looked up from his phone and gave me a smile that lingered just a little too long. "Evening," he said. "Hey," I replied quickly, moving past him. I made my way down the aisles, tossing things into the cheap plastic basket I'd grabbed at the door. Cotton pads, cleaning wipes, a box of off-brand crackers, nothing special. I was halfway through the store, near the back wall where the lighting was a bit dimmer, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned slightly, expecting it to be one of the women looking for plastic pumpkins. It was the employee. He wasn't carrying a pricing gun or a box of stock. His hands were tucked into his vest pockets, and he was walking slowly, too slowly for someone with a job to do. When he saw me look back, he didn't look away. He didn't ask if I needed help. He just stopped at the end of the aisle and watched me. I felt that familiar prickle of heat at the back of my neck. In my line of work, you learn the difference between being looked at and being watched. This was the latter. The most dangerous person in a store isn't always a stranger from the street, sometimes, it's the person with the keys and the name tag. He didn't ask if I was finding everything okay, he just stood there, waiting to see which aisle I'd go down next. In a store this quiet, your footsteps aren't the only ones you should be listening to. If you want to know how a simple shopping trip turned into a game of cat and mouse in the dark, hit that like button and subscribe for part 2. And remember, a uniform doesn't always mean someone is there to help. I'll see you in the next one. It was the employee. "Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to startle you," he said, standing way too close. I gave a quick, awkward smile. "No worries. You here by yourself?" he asked, his eyes scanning the basket like it held all my secrets. "Yeah, just grabbing a few things," I replied. He nodded but didn't move. "You a model?" That threw me off. I blinked. Yeah, sometimes." Knew it, he said. You've got that face. The kind that shouldn't be in a dollar store. I didn't respond to that. I just gave a weak laugh and turned away. He lingered a few seconds longer before walking off. My skin crawled a little, but I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe he was just trying to be nice in his own awkward way. I wrapped up quickly and headed to the front. He had beat me there and was already back behind the register, standing a little straighter. He didn't say anything as I approached, just started scanning my items one by one. Crackers, huh, he said. You don't look like someone who eats crackers. I smiled tightly. I do. He raised an eyebrow like it was some grand mystery. These are pretty gross. You sure you want them? I nodded. Yep. He kept scanning. You live around here? I paused. Not really. He stared at me for a second. I feel like I've seen you before. I've only been here once or twice, I said. He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me. You should come more often. Liven up the place. I didn't respond. The beep of each scanned item filled the heavy silence. I paid in cash to avoid dragging the process out. He handed me the change, then looked over his shoulder. Well, now I'm off. He flicked off the light above his register and stepped around the counter. I gave a polite smile. Oh, cool. Have a good night. I turned toward the door, but I heard his footsteps right behind me. Too close again. Where you headed after this? He asked as we exited the sliding doors together. I tried to sound casual. Just home. He nodded and kept pace with me across the dark asphalt. I was thinking of grabbing food. You hungry? I froze slightly but kept walking. No, I already ate. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly anymore. What did I just say? I furrowed my brow. What? I said I'm going to grab food. You coming with me or not? His tone had changed, sharper, more aggressive, like he had skipped several steps in a normal conversation and was suddenly demanding an answer he felt he was owed. The scariest transition is when a nice guy stops pretending. 1 minute he was complimenting my face, and the next, he was treating my time like his property. He didn't ask me on a date, he gave me an order. And as we walked into that nearly empty parking lot, I realized I wasn't just a customer to him, I was a trophy he thought he'd already won. If you want to know how I handled a man who wouldn't take no for an answer in the dark, hit that subscribe button for the final part. And remember, never let a stranger know where you're going next. I'll see you in the next one. I don't even know you, I said, my voice shaking but firm. He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound, like I'd just told the world's dumbest joke. You don't got to know me. It's just food. I reached my car and fumbled with the fob. The second the locks clicked, I pulled the handle, but as the door began to open, he suddenly reached past me. He gripped the edge of the door and yanked it wider, his body leaning into my personal space. Come on, he said, his voice dropping to a low, demanding growl. Let's go. His hand brushed my arm, and the touch felt like a physical burn. I jerked back, every alarm bell in my head screaming. Back off. I snapped. Instead of backing away, he stepped forward, trying to wedge himself between me and the open door, trying to trap me against the seat. That's when instinct took over. I didn't waste time arguing or pleading. I turned and ran. My boots pounded the pavement as I bolted away from my own car. I didn't even think about screaming, I just focused on moving. I heard him yell something behind me, something angry and unintelligible, and then the terrifying rhythm of footsteps. He was chasing me. The strip mall was a graveyard of dark storefronts, but at the far end, I saw the glowing red neon of a Maxmart. It was a discount department store that stayed open until 9 o'clock. I aimed for it like it was a lighthouse. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel him behind me, closing the gap. My shopping bag slapped against my leg, and my keys dug into my palm as I made a final, desperate sprint. I reached the automatic doors just as they slid open for a customer walking out. I barreled past them, nearly knocking the guy over. Inside, I didn't stop until I found an employee at the service desk. "Call the police," I gasped, my chest heaving. "Please, a man is following me." He tried to force his way into my car. The employee didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone immediately and told me to stay put. I huddled near the shopping carts, peeking through the glass doors. But the man was gone. The parking lot looked exactly the same as when I'd arrived, only now, the shadows felt like they were reaching for me. The police arrived within 5 minutes. They walked me back to my car, which, thankfully, was still there, untouched. I told them everything. Devon's face, the model, comments, the way he'd followed me out and tried to hijack my night. They asked me to go back into Dollar Village with them. When we walked in, the woman behind the counter, another employee I hadn't seen earlier, didn't even need to hear the whole story. As soon as I described the man in the lime green vest, her face fell. "That's Devon," she said. "The most chilling part of any encounter isn't the stranger, it's the person whose name everyone already knows." Devon wasn't just a weird coworker, he was a problem the store had been ignoring, and I was the one who almost paid the price for their silence. When a predator has a name tag and a schedule, they don't have to look for victims, the victims come to them. If you want to know what the police found out about Devon's past and why he was really off that night, hit that like button and subscribe for the final update. And remember, if someone tries to open your car door, don't look back. Just run. I'll see you in the next one. "He just left," the coworker said, her voice trembling slightly. The police took down every detail and began a search immediately. Since Devon was an employee, they had his address. He lived only a few blocks away. They found him later that night. I don't know the exact list of charges, but I know they took him in. I filed my report, and the next morning, I bought a lock bar for my steering wheel and a canister of pepper spray. I stopped going to that strip mall entirely. But the worst part wasn't the physical threat, it was the memory. I kept replaying the moment he touched my car door. That split second where he smiled like he had all the time in the world, like he truly believed I was just going to give in. He never yelled. He didn't need to. He thought he was in control. But I ran. And I still have dreams where I don't. I never liked shopping at night. Not because I inherently expected something bad to happen, but because nearly empty stores always made me feel watched. You know the feeling. That unnatural quiet, those humming fluorescent lights, and the faint echo of your own footsteps down hollow aisles. Still, I had no choice that evening. It had been one of those days where everything went wrong. My shift at the vet clinic had run late, I'd skipped lunch to cover for a coworker, and halfway home, I realized I was out of laundry detergent and light bulbs. I didn't have the energy for a big grocery store, so I pulled into the Green Spot Dollar off Barlow Street. It was close to my apartment, only a 10-minute walk if I'd been on foot. The parking lot was a sea of empty gray asphalt under a single, buzzing orange street lamp. I remember thinking how much the store looked like an island in the middle of nowhere. I killed the engine, grabbed my bag, and headed toward the automatic doors. The moment they slid open, the smell of stale floor wax hit me. There was no one at the registers. The store felt completely abandoned, until I heard a low, rhythmic thudding coming from the very back, the sound of someone hitting a heavy metal door over and over again. In a dollar store, everything is supposed to be cheap. Except for the price you pay when you walk into a trap. I thought I was alone, but the sound coming from the back of that store told me someone was there, and they weren't stocking shelves. When the person meant to be at the register is missing and the only sound is a rhythmic pounding from the dark, you don't stay to find out why. If you want to hear what I found in the back of the green spot dollar, hit that like button and subscribe. And remember, if a store feels too empty, it probably is. I'll see you in the next one. But I'd driven because it was already after 8 p.m., and the July heat was still clinging to the air like sweat. The green spot was one of those dollar stores that felt like a time capsule, old tile floors, mismatched shelves, and that strange lemon cleaner meets mildew smell in the air. I'd been there enough times to recognize the employees by face, if not by name. It was never crowded, honestly, that was the best part about it. That night, there were a few people inside, 2 teens whispering and giggling near the snacks, a middle-aged woman with a cart half full of canned goods, and an older man quietly browsing near the seasonal aisle. I grabbed one of the faded plastic baskets from the stack by the door and started down the toiletries aisle, checking my mental list. That's when I saw him. He wasn't there when I came in, I would have noticed. He practically zoomed past me, actually bumping my basket with his as he went by. I flinched at the sudden motion. He muttered something that sounded like, sorry, but didn't stop. He just kept moving like he was in a race. He had a buzzed haircut, maybe early 30s, but he looked rough. His jeans sagged and his t-shirt had holes under the sleeves. What really stood out, though, was his footwear. He was wearing mismatched flip-flops with dirty gray socks. Those flimsy foam sandals you get at gas stations. I watched him zip around the corner into the next aisle, his gait frantic and erratic. Most people in a dollar store at 8 p.m. are moving slow, dragging their feet after a long day. But this guy was vibrating with a weird, nervous energy. I tried to go back to looking for detergent, but then I heard it, the sound of him coming back toward me, but this time, he wasn't looking at the shelves. He was looking over his shoulder, checking the front of the store. In a quiet store, someone moving that fast isn't shopping, they're looking for something they can't find on a shelf. The mismatched flip-flops and the frantic pace weren't just signs of a rough day, they were signs of a man who was already running from something. And when I realized I was the only thing standing between him and the back of the store, the lemon cleaner smell suddenly felt a lot like fear. If you want to know what this guy was running toward, and who was right behind him, hit that like button and subscribe for part 2. I'll see you in the next one. I already told you no, I said, firmer this time. He didn't move. He looked down at his basket, then back at me. You got an attitude or something? He asked, his eyes narrowing into slits. What? I blinked, my heart hammering against my ribs. No, I'm just not paying for a stranger's stuff. Can you back up a little? Then, without warning, he slammed his basket onto the ground. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet store. Everything inside flew out, a bag of chips popped open, spraying crumbs everywhere, batteries rolled under the metal shelving, a stick of deodorant bounced and landed right at my feet. What's your problem, huh? He snapped, stepping even closer until I could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. What the hell is your problem? I felt my pulse jump. He was raising his voice now, the echoes bouncing off the high, industrial ceiling. People in nearby aisles were turning to look, their faces pale and uncertain. I don't have a problem, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Please leave me alone. But he stepped forward again, crowding me against the shelf of cleaning supplies. No, you do. You think you're better than me? Is that it? His tone was pure venom. I took a slow step back, my hand reaching behind me for anything. A heavy bottle of bleach, a spray can, anything. I didn't want to escalate things, but every instinct in me was screaming that this man was unhinged. He kept repeating himself. What's your problem? What's your problem? Huh, over and over, louder each time, like a scratched record spinning out of control. I glanced around for help. An older man near the front looked toward us, his hand hovering over his phone but unsure whether to intervene. One of the teen girls was peeking from the toy aisle, her eyes wide with fear. No one stepped in. "Back off," I said again, louder this time. "Just go." "Hey," a voice finally rang out. A store employee in a green apron jogged over. He was maybe in his early 20s, thin and pale, and he was clearly nervous. His hands were shaking, but he stepped between us. "Sir, you need to leave right now. You're harassing the customers." The man in the mismatched flip-flops didn't even look at the employee. He kept his eyes locked on mine, a terrifying, crooked smile slowly spreading across his face. "I'm going," he whispered, so low only I could hear. "But I'll be waiting in the lot." The only thing worse than a confrontation inside a store is the promise of one waiting for you outside. When the employee stepped in, it felt like a rescue, until the man told me he wasn't going away, he was just changing locations. Now, I was trapped in a store with only one exit, and a predator who had all the time in the world to wait by my car. If you want to know how I got out of that parking lot and who was actually waiting in the driver's seat of that blue sedan, hit that like button and subscribe for the final part. I'll see you in the next one. The man looked at the employee with pure rage. "I'm not doing nothing," he snapped. "You're yelling at customers." "I need you to leave," the kid replied, his voice cracking slightly. The man paused, and I held my breath, bracing for a physical fight. Then, like a switch had been flipped, he grinned. "Fine," he said, his voice suddenly cheerful and light. He turned and walked a few feet, then stopped. Slowly, he peeled off his mismatched flip-flops, then his socks, one at a time. The socks looked crusted and damp. With a sudden, violent flick of his wrist, he threw them at me. They missed, thankfully, but just barely. "Crazy bitch," he muttered. Then he turned and walked out of the store completely barefoot, leaving his scattered items, his shoes, and a trail of stunned silence behind him. The air inside shifted as soon as the door hissed shut. It felt like everyone in the building exhaled at once. "You okay?" the employee asked. He looked just as shaken as I was. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't. My hands were vibrating. "Want me to call the cops?" I thought about it, but he was already gone into the night. "No, it's fine. I don't think he'll come back." I was wrong. I checked out a few minutes later. The cashier, an older woman with short gray curls, asked if I was all right, her eyes full of pity. I nodded, but I couldn't stop glancing at the front windows. The night outside looked darker than usual, more pressing. I hurried to my car, my keys clenched in my fist so hard they bit into my skin. My skin crawled with that same old sensation. Being watched. Once I was inside with the doors locked, I looked across the parking lot. There he was. He was standing barefoot on the curb under a street lamp, his pale skin glowing under the orange light. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just stood there, watching my car. I reversed slowly and drove off, trying to stay calm. But my hands clutched the wheels so tightly I thought they'd cramp. I circled the block 3 times before finally going home, just to be absolutely sure no headlights were following me. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I kept checking the peephole on my apartment door, over and over, just in case. I never went back to the green spot. I started shopping at the big, crowded store across town instead. Even though I hated the crowds, at least there, I didn't feel like a target in a spotlight. That empty stare is often the most terrifying part, realizing that the person standing in front of you isn't playing by the same social rules as the rest of the world. It wasn't about the money or the items, it was about the thrill of the intrusion. The fact that he returned a few days later proves your instincts were 100% correct. He wasn't just having a bad day, He was hunting for a reaction, and when he didn't get it from you, he came back to find it from someone else. You didn't just escape a weird encounter, you likely avoided a much more violent escalation. The scariest thing about a predator is that they don't need a reason to pick you, they just need an opportunity. He wasn't looking for a handout, he was looking for a victim, and when the green spot became too hot, he simply vanished into the shadows of another neighborhood. We like to think the police catch the bad guys, but sometimes they just move on to the next quiet store on the next dark street. If you've ever felt that cold chill of an empty stare, don't wait for them to speak, just get out. Hit that subscribe button to stay alert with more true stories. I'll see you in the next one.